I definitely hear that you're trying to ensure that students have more time with the content. With the elimination of the early release Wednesday, could you please further describe where and how do teachers and staff have more time for professional development and planning, and how are you fitting that into the school year?
Absolutely. That's a critical point and a very good question. So it is built into the master calendar. So every day, K-5, they have at least 50 minutes of planning daily that they can use collaboratively, they can use vertically, and so forth. At these three schools specifically, we've leveraged our Title I funds to provide additional time depending on the schedule. Jenkins is an early schedule, so in the afternoon, teachers are compensated to stay 2 hours Tuesday and Thursday for professional development and planning. We don't really separate the planning and professional development as much. We want the professional development to be job embedded, and there's a planning component that comes with it. In addition, our school calendar, we've built in quarterly planning days. So we're making use of our district calendar. So there are 3 occasions across the school year that's built in for quarterly planning. So it's a half-day release for kids. So instead of releasing every day half-day, we do short-range planning during the week and in the after-school part, and then we do long-range planning in those 3 pieces that are built in the calendar. So we wanted to provide additional time for kids, but not sacrifice the teacher planning expertise, which is really what's going to move kids ahead.
I have one more, and this is a bit rhetorical, but I heard you describe that, and this is a question that speaks to your expectations as district leaders. You've shared with us that 75% of your students are low income, 11% or so are ELL. Do you feel that it's appropriate for this board or your community to have a different set of expectations for those students because they are low income?
No, not at all. I think that would be very wrong. And you know, our mission in Newport News is to really built on 2 things. One, we know that we're here to prepare our kids for college careers and citizenship. And we do that through a belief system that smart is something that everybody becomes in Newport News, our grown-ups as well as our young people. And that every day that's what we come to school to do, is to build smartness and to find a way for each young person to become smarter than they were when they started that morning. And that's one of the reasons we invented or instituted this intervention block this year, was that it's not enough to just measure who knows what, but then we have to do something about that. And we're going to build that into every day, and then we're going to build that into everybody's responsibility to move all of our young people forward. And when you see the end result, we have an 88% graduation rate. Half of our young people get advanced diplomas, and so I think the marathon with our young people ends up pretty successfully. And we just work very hard along the way to make sure that kids are a part of that marathon all along the way.
How long have you been the superintendent?
Since 2008.
And you did say they're a school with a lead turnaround partner. What year are they in that cycle?
This will be their 2nd year.
And what progress have you seen, really, because you have this lead turnaround partner? What has really changed because of these increased monies and resources?
Well, I think it has given us the opportunity, the funds have given us the opportunity to hire additional reading specialists, additional teacher coach. So I think some personnel additions have been very helpful at the school. I think the lead turnaround partner, because they did not come to us till January of last year. So that is, it gave us some outside eyes to look at things that we get used to seeing and may not see as clearly as somebody that comes in new. So they gave us a great deal of insight into this doesn't align to this is not, this is not as effective as you might think it is. And so they gave us some feedback that way.
And where is the school board in all of this? What are the concrete relationships and how are they involved? Because you've got more than half of your schools that look like they're going to have major problems in the future. So I'm just wondering if I were on the school board, where would I be and what would be keeping me up at night? Because it seems that there is a day of reckoning coming.
I think our school board is concerned, as we all are. I think they also have a belief or have the knowledge that we are making progress and we will continue to make changes in areas that we're not making progress, such as literacy. So I think what they want to see from me and from the staff is acknowledging where we are doing well and continue those structures and habits, and acknowledging where we're not doing well and to dismantle those structures and habits, and let's change and put some new ways of approaching education. And we've done both of those things.
And then my last question, you said that you believe that you will recapture 14 schools in 1 year.
No, I said in the next year or two.
And what gives you such confidence?
I think the progress that we've made in these schools, it's a very deliberate 14 schools. They're all within 12 or less points from meeting that accreditation mark, and looking at the progress that they made the year prior, plus changes in leadership, changes in curriculum, and changes. So it's a very targeted approach. Some of those schools are only 3 to 4 points away. They just lost their 3-year average, so we'll recapture them very quickly. And then other schools we have on a multi-year plan, because we know, say they're 20 points away from the benchmark, we need to cut that in at least half this year and then set ourselves up for that piece. So it's a very differentiated piece with that. And that's another piece that we've worked through with our school board.
And the support also is then differentiated in terms of, is it a math issue, is it a literacy issue, is it a science issue, and then who goes and becomes a part of that school from the central office and build a central office partnership with each of these schools. It's very differentiated and very supportive, as well as to keep track of how things are moving. So.
Obviously, discipline has a huge impact on student success. Have you analyzed the suspension rates at this school, or have you determined that that could also play into some of the achievement gaps that you see?
That really does not at this school, and we are. I think we've been very strategic in Newport News to surround our thinking around a youth development philosophy. And at the elementary schools, that looks like morning meetings, and it looks like clubs and activities, and it looks like a part of their curriculum in each of the grade levels is what we call an I-Care curriculum that builds a sense of a community service or a school service project in the schools. So I think we've approached discipline moving away from the compliance and control and into how can we make this a school community. And the young people have really, and the teachers have really become excited about we're partners at school. And so we have not seen, we've seen a tremendous decrease in suspensions, suspension rates in Newport News. So.
And just one more question. How about the family engagement?
Yes.
District-wide as well as this particular school?
We have a family parent involvement specialist at this school, at a lot of our schools. And then we have the team of parent involvement specialists that then sponsor in neighborhoods and schools community events. This school organized home visit events where they are part of the home. They serve a large part of their population is from one apartment complex. So they work out of that apartment complex, their community room, and rather than at the school. And that has been very effective. And they have homework nights, and they had a fall festival there. And so they're beginning to rebuild the whole relationship with families at this school.
Good, thanks.
I don't know if the music was my cue that I'm not allowed to speak, but I'm going to go forward and ask questions. As you can see from each of us, I think we're struggling with trying to make the right decision,
I understand.
to the degree of support that we need to provide. But I want to acknowledge, to be honest with you, looking at what has happened between your scores last year and this year, that in this particular school, we see a little bit more improvement than we have seen in others. And so I want to acknowledge that up front, but then join Mr. Dillard in my concern that while you moved well in one direction on content areas, that it might have been at the expense of your history. So I want to encourage you to look at that very carefully. The other thing that Dr. Kennedy was asking you about your involvement with peer schools, we had a very rich conversation yesterday at our retreat, and I want to encourage, not just within your district, but to look at what other schools that share similar demographics in a division your size that are doing well. Can you have conversations with them to see what they may be doing that you haven't thought of? And I really want to encourage that, because I think we need to, the divisions, the schools need to start to parlay with each other, because there's some very good things going on in the state, and take advantage of that.
No, I appreciate that. And another resource that we've been a part of is the VSBA's Challenge Schools group, and I think that that has also been a way to connect and to find districts like us that aren't close to us. So that's been very helpful. I neglected to mention that, but that has been very helpful.
Thank you very much. If there are no other comments or concerns, I'll just say that I'm impressed by a lot of the things you're doing. You're doing a lot of things by repurposing existing resources. And my concern when I look at the bigger picture, eyeballing the district and what you said, some of your concerns is whether you can sustain that among that many schools at that many times simultaneously. I think you've got your work cut out for you over the next year, not just here, but in those other 14 schools. Members of the board, I am going to read this. There is an error in the written motion, so please, what's missing is the contingency piece. So I'm going to read it and make certain it goes into the record the way we intended. The superintendent, is there a motion to accept the recommendation of the superintendent of public instruction that the Board of Education approve the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for Willis A. Jenkins Elementary School from the Newport News School Board? The approval of this rating is contingent upon the superintendent of Newport News City's public schools entering into an agreement with the superintendent of public instruction that details the essential actions that must occur in the 2014 to 2015 school year to improve the achievement of the students in the school. This agreement must be signed by both parties December 12, 2014, or the school will revert to a designation of accreditation denied. Is there a motion? Moved by Mrs. Atkinson, seconded by Dr. Kennedy. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Let me, at this rough midpoint, just take a moment to thank the superintendents, the individual school staffs, because some of you, now that you may want to leave at this point, and the school board members that may be here from those school districts. Coming here is a trip for some of you, and it is an indication of your devotion and your dedication, not only to the schools in your school division and the teachers in your school division, but the students in your school division. And no matter what the outcomes are today, we appreciate it, and we are grateful for you to be here. Thank you. The next item.
The Superintendent of Public Instruction recommends that the Board of Education deny the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for Booker T. Washington High School from the Norfolk City School Board.
Board member comments and questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to accept the recommendation of the Superintendent of Public Instruction recommending that the Board of Education deny the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for Booker T. Washington High School from the Norfolk City School Board? Moved by Mr. Dillard, seconded by Mrs. Wodiska. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion is carried unanimously.
The Superintendent of Public Instruction recommends that the Board of Education approve the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for Tidewater Park Elementary School from the Norfolk City School Board.
Board member questions, concerns? Mrs. Sears.
As with the one with Willis, I did have, but as you see, I was persuaded otherwise. And it's good to be available for further questioning. But I did have, well, not conniptions, but some concerns about Tidewater Park. But I do note that their numbers are going in the right direction. And we do talk about schools that do have issues. And so when we see one going in the right direction, I do want to make note of it that there were massive changes at this school. And those who were not willing and able were allowed to make other decisions, and the intervention was massive. And I want to point out that the jumps in reading, writing, they went from 36 to 67, math, 49 to 70, history, 71 to 79, still huge. And I don't know if they could share some best practices on their website just for others in their peer groups who can just see what does it take to get numbers that look like this. And I just wanted to point that out, that they're doing something right at this particular school.
Mrs. Atkinson.
I don't really have a question, but an observation, because it appears that you'll be exiting priority this year. And so I just want to recognize what that means on a financial basis for the school, and just to encourage that you find a means of keeping up the kind of support that's necessary to support the school that is moving in the right direction. And so just acknowledge that and encourage you, the staff in that school, and the principal of the school.
Mrs. Wodiska.
Thank you. This is really a comment for the division-wide. I continue to be concerned about the unevenness of academic performance across the division. And there are clearly some academic have schools and some academic have not, which is unfortunately closely aligned to some other factors. And would really look forward to seeing what work you're going to be doing to raise all ships, to ensure that those expectations are kept high for everyone. And as other board members have encouraged other school divisions, I would too encourage you to consult with other school divisions and other leaders that have like populations and ask them what they're doing to make meaningful and significant gains, particularly in those school divisions that are the schools that are before us, but across the division. I know that you can be highly successful. We want you to be highly successful, but it's going to take more work. And I hope that the next time that you come before us, it's with better news.
Other board member comments, questions, concerns? I would just echo what Mrs. Atkinson said. You know, it's one of the bizarre formulations that in education you don't get a lot of additional assistance until you hit the bottom, and then the bottom and work your way up. The minute you get just above the line, the additional resources disappear. And I think that part of what the superintendent's trying to do here with these recommendations that are contingent upon some agreements is figuring out a way to provide that kind of assistance before that bottom is hit. And so I would share the concerns that Mrs. Atkinson said, that you've got some resource repurposing that you've got to do, and it's going to be a tough job. And what we don't want to do is see school back here again with others. Other board member comments or questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to accept the recommendation of the Superintendent of Public Instruction that the Board of Education approve the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for Tidewater Elementary School from the Norfolk City School Board, contingent upon entering into an agreement? Moved by Dr. Basil, seconded by Mrs. Wodisco. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion's carried unanimously.
The Superintendent of Public Instruction recommends that the Board of Education approve the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for Vernon Johns Junior High School from the Petersburg City School Board.
Board member comments, questions? Mrs. Wodisco.
I really would like to make a comment about the leadership of the superintendent on this one for a moment. I have been impressed. My very first state school board meeting was Petersburg coming before this board in a very difficult and challenged situation, a situation that was inherited but accepted. And I was incredibly impressed with the superintendent's leadership to roll up his sleeves, to do the hard work, to be highly collaborative, to follow through, to execute. And as we were going through this process over the last 15 months, as we were collectively learning, some things were working, things weren't quite going the way we had all hoped, that corrections were made. And that type of leadership is incredibly important as we're doing this hard work. And so I really want to commend you for your leadership. And I hope and look forward to the board continuing to give you their full support, because I know that the two of you working together will continue on this path, and you're on that path. So congratulations for the work you've been doing and the challenge that you have accepted.
I too would like to echo Disca's comments. It's very easy for us to kind of get the numbers and determinations, but accountability and accreditation is really about confidence. Are you in the right direction, where you are now? And I think that one of the biggest pluses is not only coming to make change, but there were bold changes. The school piece, and just simply reshuffle the deck so you have the same days, but spread out over a different period of time. But you've added days to that, and you did that with not a lot of resources. Either you got some money to kind of develop the year-round school piece, but you engaged the full community without assurance that they would agree. Get comfortable with it. The other is the dynamic of trying to make those kinds of bold changes in an environment that sometimes doesn't reward it equally because they want a quick turnaround. Well, you didn't get there overnight, and so a quick turnaround is not as likely. You want a sustained pattern of growth. And so my colleagues really support not only the work you're doing, but the direction, the vision. And I think sustained effort and sustained support is critical to make a school like a system like Petersburg get beyond describing the problems and situations that led to that, to the point of saying we're not only making success, but we're making it. So I echo the comments of my board colleagues.
Mrs. Edwards.
I, too, would like to echo the comments of all of my colleagues. You never really know what an impact you are making until you're in the community and you can hear it. And just the other day, I was on the military base at Fort Lee, and this just goes to show you your impact. In the past, soldiers that would come in would say, oh, gosh, you don't want to have your students or children in Petersburg. They would say that because of just past performance. But now, just the other day, they're saying, oh, you know what? Petersburg has a great superintendent. You should send your students there. That's the conversation, and I just wanted you to know that it's making an impact.
I'll be even blunter. To be honest with you, if this had come from any other superintendent superintendent, any of the number of previous superintendents in Petersburg and staff that they had put together, I'd probably be voting no. My vote will be yes, largely because I know the record of this particular administration, what you and your team have put together. Doing the right thing is usually doing the hard thing. And in a city like Petersburg, that's a city with a lot of cross currents going on, doing the right thing and the hard thing is extraordinarily difficult. You've put together a team that's doing this, and for all the reasons that Dr. Kennedy and Mrs. Edwards said, you're doing it in a strategic way, not just trying to satisfy whatever the latest voice is. And we profoundly respect that and profoundly appreciate the things that you and your group are doing for the children of Petersburg. So, and frankly, we profoundly respect and appreciate the backup that the board has given you at this point. They need to continue doing that because we've seen it time and again that even if a superintendent does the right thing, if they don't get the backup from the school board, it disintegrates very quickly. So I've said this to Mr. Pritchard in the past, and I'll say it to you now. Keep it up. Other board member comments, questions? Again, I am going to read this carefully because there's a line missing from the recommendation, and I want to make certain we put it into the record. Is there a motion to accept the recommendation of the Superintendent of Public Instruction that the Board of Education approve the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for Vernon Johns Junior High School from the Petersburg City School Board? The approval of this rating is contingent on the Superintendent of Petersburg City School Board entering into an agreement with the Superintendent of Public Instruction that details the essential actions that must occur in the 2014-2015 school year to improve the achievement of the students in this school. This agreement must be signed by both parties by December 12, 2014, or the school will revert to a designation accreditation denied. Is there a motion? Moved by Mrs. Atkinson, seconded by Dr. Kennedy. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, motion's carried unanimously.
The Superintendent of Public Instruction recommends that the Board of Education approve the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for Armstrong High School from the Richmond City School Board.
Board member comments and questions? I will just comment. I've known Dr. Bedden since he was assistant principal in one of the schools in my district back in New York, back in Northern Virginia. Well, for some people that is New York. And it was a great disappointment when he left to take other positions, and lo and behold, about 10 years later, I meet him outside the governor's office and going into himself. This is another example, I think, where I think the board appreciates very strongly the strong leadership of the superintendent. He is new. He's got a lot of ground to cover. But certainly from my perspective, and I'm certain from the department's perspective, that kind of strong leadership is profoundly appreciated. Other board member comments and questions? If not, is there a motion to accept the recommendation of the Superintendent of Public Instruction that the Board of Education approve for a rating of conditionally accredited for Armstrong High School from the Richmond City School Board contingent upon entering into an agreement? Is there a motion? Moved by Dr. Kennedy, seconded by Mrs. Atkinson. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion's carried unanimously.
The Superintendent of Public Instruction recommends that the Board of Education approve the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for George Wythe High School from the Richmond City School Board.
Board member comments, questions? Mrs. Atkinson.
I'm just going to make a comment based on, and it actually reflects back to the previous one, is to acknowledge the increase in the graduation rates in addition to the increase in the scores. And it is, you are trending in such a positive direction and doing it and getting more children out of your school with a a document that will enable them to be successful. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Dr. Kennedy.
I'd like to also encourage the local board to continue their efforts to support Dr. Bedden. Coming in is one thing. To be faced with the challenges that at the beginning of the year are having to make an instructional decision and respectfully listen to those who are that and have questions about why, I thought was very admirable. Very easy to get caught up in the moment and trying to please others, and in doing so, you don't do what's in the best interest of young people for the longer term. That's not to be as undermining the efforts of us, but children get a do-over. They have one chance in elementary school, one chance in middle school, one chance in high school. Adults, we can recycle and have many opportunities to say, oh, the time. And I greatly appreciate his work, but the board's support, tandem of the superintendent and the board has to be on the same page, but also support each other's work. Otherwise, it cannot be implemented with quality, and more importantly, it can't be sustained. So this is kind of a shout out to the board for the support they've given Dr. Ben, and he'll need that as he continues to team differences in Richmond.
And I'd echo that support for the board. They're incredibly important on this. Any other questions, concerns? If not, is there a motion to accept the recommendation of the Superintendent of Public Instruction that the Board of Education approve the request of a rating of conditionally accredited for high school from Richmond City School Board, contingent upon entering into an agreement? Is there a motion? Mrs. Atkinson moves. Mrs. Edwards seconds. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? Motion's carried unanimously.
The Superintendent of Public Instruction recommends that the Board of Education approve the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for Thomas C. Bushell Middle School from the Richmond City School Board.
Board member comments, and Mrs. Sears.
Not a question, but a comment. And I did note that, as did Newport News, Richmond City Schools has 3 schools before us that have accreditation issues, and actually possibly some others under another tab. But it is important that when a leader is hired, unless, and we've worked for leaders, like goodness knows, you think they're going to kill us all. And that's not what we have here. We have a very capable, from what I've seen so far, superintendent. Need to give him an opportunity and a chance to make the necessary corrections that will bring the success that we all desire. And so I would encourage, as has already been stated, for that to happen, even though he didn't create this, and he's trying to make it work. And so I'm in absolute agreement with this. These things take time.
Mrs. Atkinson, followed by Mrs. Wodeski.
Just in this one, I want to talk about the money issue again, because if we look at our data and the information that we have, they've been in school improvement grant from 2010, 11, 11, 12, and then priority, and they're exiting priority in 2014, 15. And so really acknowledging what that means and encouraging that board to continue to provide the support that school's going to need to continue to trend in the right direction.
I too want to echo my comments about the critical importance of the school board continuing to maintain its strong support for the superintendent. You know, education is a team sport, and it takes a really solid team to get there. And this work that goes on in school divisions has to be sustained, and the course has to be maintained. And as this continues down the road, as SIG funds start to go away, as the work honestly gets harder at this point. Once you stop the drop and you start to go up, you reach that point in the curve where it gets that much harder. And I would say that this is the time for that school board to double down and support the superintendent. And striking from my home roots, you stay with the one that brung you to the dance. And this is a time for that because they're on the path and that work's going to be hard. So just carry on.
Mr. Dillard,
Do we have a representative from Virginia Beach?
we're on Richmond still,
Oh, I'm sorry. Beg your pardon.
but we do. I'm told we do.
Let me get to it. Okay.
It's here.
Sorry about that.
We haven't gotten to the point where we're going to ask Virginia Beach to answer questions about Richmond. Give us time. If there are no other board member comments or questions, is there a motion to accept the recommendation of the Superintendent of Public Instruction that the Board of Education approve the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for Thomas C. Bushall Middle School from the Richmond City School Board contingent upon entering into an agreement? Is there a motion? Moved by Mrs. Atkinson, seconded by Dr. Basil. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Hey, Virginia Beach.
The Superintendent of Public Instruction recommends that the Board of Education approve the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for Bayside Middle School from the Virginia Beach City School Board.
Mr. Dillard, you can't change your mind now. They came up.
I thought I might as well.
Yeah. I just had a quick question. And I know we had an addition to this particular piece here that added 7th and 8th grade. Do you all not have a 6th grade in your middle schools?
We have
Or
two.
is that only?
We have two campuses. So we have a 7-8 campus and we have a 6th grade campus. So we split the two campuses.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other board member comments or questions? If not, is there a motion to accept the recommendation of the Superintendent of Public Instruction that the Board of Education approve the request for a rating of conditionally accredited for Bayside Middle School from Virginia Beach City Public?
Now I'm on the right page. Can I move that?
Only after I finish, Mr. Dillard. From the Virginia Beach City School Board, contingent upon entering into an agreement. Moved by Mr. Dillard. Seconded by Dr. Basil. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, and thank you to all of those. Let me...
Before they leave.
Yeah. Go ahead. You want to say something?
Yeah. This is necessarily tied to the action we just took. The importance that we can learn from a place like Virginia Beach, a large system that structurally should have a way to resource internally how to improve schools. And it's not just a model that I think my colleagues are interested in for you, but for other large systems, but also what it can do for how to partner with smaller school divisions or those who have similar kinds of challenges. I remember several years ago, Fairfax came down to look at Richmond Elementary to learn how they could improve Fairfield Elementary, how they could improve reading scores, and they went to a place that they never thought they would visit. I think you can resource for others, and I realize it's beyond what the board charges you, but it's a public school system. And so the children, wherever they're educated, at some point in time, we're all going to rely on them. Won't have the chance to say, did you come through our system? Well educated, they care deeply, and they are able to deliver whatever they are required to deliver at high levels. So I hope that what you do with your schools can model for how we can also resource others and support them during very tight times, because we all are going to either suffer or we're going to be winners by how we work together as opposed to working independently.
All right, Mr. President, may I just make a quick comment? I know it's a little unusual. I just want to begin my conversation with the Board of Education by saying that the premise that I start with is that we will improve, that we will not be back here having this conversation with you, and that we look forward to sharing our strengths with our other school divisions, also partnering with some of the great school divisions around the state that are fully accredited to make sure that we understand what they've done and learn from them as well. So we look forward to that conversation. And thank you, Dr. Kennedy.